Good morning and welcome to State Senator Kathleen Kauth, legislative candidate from District 31. Thank you, Senator Kauth, for joining us for our virtual candidate legislative meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, volunteer state president, and advocacy lead volunteers Joyce Beck and Bob Lassen. We appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. Senator Kauth, if you want to start us off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, and we're thinking around 5 minutes or less, that would be wonderful. And once we've completed your opening, then we'll move into the questions.
Absolutely.
So I'll pass it back to you.
So make sure I'm on. Yes, there we go. My name is Kathleen Kauth. I am the current senator for Legislative District 31. I was elected to fill Senator Paul's last 2 years in 2022 after he unexpectedly passed away. So this will be my first 4-year election. I have a background in mediation and conflict coaching, and that's what I do for my private business. It's been a little bit different trying to do that while I'm a senator. So my client list has decreased significantly, but that's okay. I have 3 sons and 1 husband and 2 dogs. My oldest son is a computer engineer in Rochester, Minnesota, working for IBM. My middle son is currently right now in the Mojave Desert because he is a second lieutenant with the Army. He's in the heavy artillery section and getting to practice blowing big things up, which is apparently the best thing in the world. And my youngest son is a junior at Lincoln. So we've lived in a lot of different places. We've moved around 7 times. This is our 7th location. We've lived here now 12 years, which is the most we've lived anywhere. And we chose to stay here because we love Nebraska, everything about it. This is where our oldest started freshman year in high school, and we knew, okay, we've got to find the right spot because once we started high school, we wanted to make sure that they all continued. We actually found our house online. We were desperate to find some place to move into before school started. And I talked to my realtor and like, okay, this just popped up and go check it out. And it was in our profile. And she's like, well, do you want to come look at it? I said, no, put an offer on it now. She's like, does your husband need to know? I'm like, no, everything's fine. My husband runs retirement communities and he actually worked for Care Services. And that's why we had moved around so many times. He was with a management company that would send us to he's really good at fixing things. So he would go to different campuses, and he was actually at that point in St. Louis, and we had planned to move there. And he called me one day and said, nope, this is not the right place for us. So we kind of switched gears really fast and are so glad we did. Everything here in Nebraska is exactly what we wanted for our family.
Well, Senator, thank you so much and appreciate your background. And like I said, I know you know these issues very well, so we're excited for a conversation that's yet to come on these issues. We have provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska, and we're looking to try and allot 5 minutes for each of those questions. I know that's a lot. These questions are jam-packed, but we're curious what your thoughts are on some of these issues. Again, these are issues that we hear from our members that are important to them, and that's why we're bringing them to attention and working on them thus far. Our first question will begin with health, caregiving, and home and community-based care, and Joyce Beck is going to take that. So I'll pass it to you, Joyce.
Good morning, Senator Kauth. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We really appreciate it. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say staying in their home as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services, as well as Area Agency on Aging, become important assets to caregivers as they care for their loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of their loved ones, but it also provides relief for an already strained long-term care industry. So my questions for you are this: what would you do to protect and or expand home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of significant workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? And secondly, what would you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Write this down because I will forget it if I don't. I'm going to start with the second question first. The unpaid family members. That is something caregivers take on such a burden, and it is so incredibly difficult, and most people don't realize it until they're actually doing it. The amount of time that they have to take away from their work, from their family, from everything, it adds up and it compiles, and it causes them to be exhausted. So I think part of it is providing respite services for caregivers is really, really important. I think the tax credit system, and that's something we've talked about quite a bit in the legislature, is how do we give tax credits to those family members who are stopping their careers, stopping their abilities to earn money to provide care, because it is the best kind of care you can get. The other thing I think we need to do, though, is also provide training, make that available for family caregivers, not just in the mechanics of the healthcare, but in how to take care of themselves as well, to make sure that they don't get burnt out. The burnout is a huge, huge issue that leads to a declination in care for the senior, as well as, you know, everybody who's involved with that household. So that's the answer to the second one. Protecting and expanding community-based services. I think one of the biggest things we need to do is look at the regulations. And I talk about almost every group that I meet with, not just with senior care, with electricians, with, you know, everybody. We have so many regulations that don't necessarily still matter. Things have changed. We don't necessarily have to have every single regulation that we've had in place. I want to know which regulations in your industry are hindering, which regulations are absolutely critical that we can't touch. Like, there are some things that are there. There's good reasons for it. My husband always said that senior care was second only to nuclear reactors for the regulations in the industry. And, you know, that there's a reason for that, because these are our most vulnerable, and we need to make sure that they are protected. But we have to figure out where that balance is between protecting and actually hindering the ability to care. And we see that in a lot of different parts of, you know, with foster care, with senior, with a lot of, when you're caring for people, there's always that balance of safety versus actually getting the job done. So I want to look at some of those things to see, okay, what can we get rid of that are hurting? What do we need to create new categories of doing background checks, or doing, you know, giving people the ability to become caregivers? Again, the training is a big part of that. How do we offer that training to people so that they can take it, so that they understand what they're doing, how things are working? So that's where I'd start with those.
Thank you.
And Senator Kauth, I want to publicly take the opportunity to thank you for your leadership on the Revenue Committee, but also for passage of the caregiver tax credit in the legislature this past session. We're extremely grateful. I know we have caregivers that are very grateful. We're excited for that to roll out. But again, I do appreciate that very much. And I also appreciate very much your comments on the training for family caregivers and that point. So I think there may be future conversations on that we'll need to have. We really appreciate your support on that. So thanks, Joyce, for the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that really quick? When we talk about that training, is that something you would want to see come through DHHS? Would you want to see that come through the area agencies on aging? You know, what mechanism, and just not to answer right now, but just, you know, kind of put it in your head, what's the mechanism that we can best and get that training out to people? Is it Zooms? Is it doing things, or does it need to be hands-on? We need to be thinking about how to quickly and efficiently get that out to people. Because funding will always be an issue. So how do we get it done, and who can we partner with? Okay, sorry.
I love that. I've written that down, and we'll be having a follow-up with you, because I really appreciate your comments on that, and we totally are on board and agree with that. That's a very important issue. So thank you, Senator Kauth, for that. And again, thank you for your leadership. It's a step forward. We have a long ways to go with supporting caregivers, but we really appreciate your leadership on that. Thank you, Joyce, for the question. Our second question now will come from Susan DeCamp, and it's on consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. So go ahead, Susan.
Good morning, Senator Kauth.
Hi.
Great to have you with us today. So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams, such as wire transfers, gift card scams, and schemes involving real property. Nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. Nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. So with that in mind, our question for you is, Consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices and provide opportunities for redress to victims of fraud? Would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices, enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund, or implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner and seller housing impersonation fraud? I know that's a lot.
I'm just writing as fast as I can. Say the last one again. The owner and seller.
Okay, the implementation of preventative or corrective measures to assist in combating owner seller housing impersonation fraud. There's been a lot of those. I don't know if a lot of it in Nebraska particularly, but nationwide there have been a lot of new scams, deed fraud, sellers claiming that they own the property when they really don't, and posing a huge problem for people that have invested in their homes. So.
Okay. So I want to kind of divide this into two different categories.
Sure.
So much of the online fraud comes from overseas, and it's very difficult to track them down, very difficult to, I mean, there are entire villages where this is what they do. This is how they earn their living. And it's very, very difficult for us to go after them. I would encourage our federal delegation to strengthen any sort of criminal punishments that they can, whether that means taking away funding for whatever country it is. I mean, whatever mechanisms they have in place, barring that, because we really as a state don't have the ability to, go after a village in Nigeria. But what I want to do is more training, more information. So yes, just a merchant's, a statement up there is great. I think the training also needs to be, we need to encourage the merchants to be doing the training. I know the banks do some of it. We've had some cases where some merchants have said, look, this doesn't seem right, when a senior has come in and said, oh, I've got to do this. Making sure that training and that knowledge is more visible and okay to do and okay to say, and actually maybe working with people on how do you talk to a senior who is, when this is brought up, they're going to be embarrassed. They may double down. They may, no, it couldn't possibly happen to me. My mother-in-law this happened to her. Some email came from a friend's email saying, hey, I need these gift cards. She went out and spent thousands of dollars on gift cards. I'm in the government. They live in Iowa, but I know people. And her husband runs retirement communities. She was so embarrassed to tell us, because that is, you've heard about it for years and years and years, and you think, gosh, that'll never happen to me because I know. But then as an older adult, those things start to slip. And so working with people on, here's what you do, give proactive, like, here's what happens. Here's a check. Like, you can call this number and say, is this something that is, we just need to make those things more proactive so that seniors don't feel infantilized by when this happens, because it will happen. That's why it's happening to them, because they are easier to deceive. If you catch people, I'm all for stringing them up by their thumbs, I don't like it when people are bullying the image of people. So I am all for making the punishments much more serious. I think there needs to be jail time for victimizing older adults. I think there needs to be jail time for victimizing pretty much anyone who's in a position of less power, until this is seriously addressed. You'll hear a lot of conversation in the legislature about how we shouldn't have prisons. We shouldn't have, we're being so mean to people who are committing these crimes. Nobody understands how bad it is. That is exactly the wrong tack to take. People will continue committing crimes if they're able to get away with it, or if they have just slaps on the wrist. I think we need to get back to a time when we said, okay, you do something bad, you get slapped, and you get slapped hard. My undergraduate degree is criminology. And when I was in college, it was swift, which means it happens fast.
Yes.
Which means it is something, and we all know when our parents were upset with us, you know what? That wait till your father comes home didn't really work with us, because my dad was a softie. It was the look from my mom, and that, I'm going to spank your butt right now. That swift and severeness kept us from doing a lot of things that we would have otherwise tried. people have gotten out of the habit of punishing people, and there's too much concern for the criminals versus the victims. So I see this as tying into that. And so again, education, swift and severe punishment for people who do this. And I'd like to make it really broadly known. I would like to have mugshots spread everywhere. This person victimized a senior person. There are a lot of people in prison who have parents and grandparents who they don't want to have victimized. So,
Great.
yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much, Senator, for those thoughts, for your wonderful thoughts on this. We really appreciate, your insight into the, having been in the legislature. We did try to pass some laws last year regarding the gift card scams. And AARP does work on the education piece. We also need help working on some of those other pieces to put in place that you mentioned. So thank you.
Question, do you guys work with the banks and work with the people who are the retail organizations? Do you already have those relationships set up so that you can coordinate with them for training?
I will answer that, Senator Kauth, and there's been some resistance, I think, because of it becomes across as a mandate on what, we have AARP has a bank safe training program that provides all sorts of training, not only for bank workers, but it could also be used for retailers, that really provides those kind of training devices and mechanisms. When we have presented that, they have their own training or they're already doing some other things. I'd be happy to follow up with you and send you some of that information. But I think you're onto something. And again, I appreciate your comments here. And I know as a member of the banking committee that you are aware of the gift cards, that legislation, and I really appreciate your passion for, enforcement on fraud and that sort of thing. So I think this is a number 2 question that I'd love to have another conversation off, later with you about some other ideas that might be coming, because yes, training's critically important, but not just for the consumers. I think we also, we agree that it also comes down to merchants, bankers, that sort of thing. And we don't want it to have to be a mandate, but we also feel it's really important. It's an important piece of the work that they do in preventing.
Even if AARP was providing training on how do you deal with a senior customer in general, I mean, there are distinct differences with how you approach, how you talk with, how you communicate with someone who is from a different generation, who may possibly be seeing signs of dementia or any sort of physical or mental decline. There are things that they don't know. So, I mean, this could be billed as a way to help them improve their customer relations rather than saying, you need to do this to protect people. Say, listen, we'd like to offer this to you so that you can learn your customers better and help your customers better, because that make it so it benefits them, not so it's yet another thing that they have to add to.
Absolutely appreciate those comments. And again, I'll follow up with you on the information we discussed. And then, yeah, I think that's another great conversation for us to have after the fact in the future. So thank you, Susan, for the question. Our last question, Senator Kauth, comes from Bob Lassen. We're going to switch over more into the housing, livable communities arena, and with helping people stay in their homes and communities. So go ahead, Bob.
Okay, AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay at the lowest level of care and cost as long as possible. And to that end, there are 2 things that we're going to address today with my question. Zoning obstacles that allow just single-family residence homes. In these communities, zoning does not include other types of housing, such as accessory dwelling houses, units, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, apartment buildings, those types of things that would be better options for seniors. And again, it's usually the zoning obstacles that are causing a problem there. The other one, of course, is property tax. And of course, that is a particular burden for the elderly because they've got very limited incomes. And then one of the things that we have in place right now to help with that is the homestead exemption. So my question is 2-phased. Nebraskans over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and the communities as they age. As housing units costs continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus they're being pushed out of their communities and homes. that they've lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as accessory dwelling units, integrational housing, manufactured homes, those types of living arrangements? The second part is, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans who do qualify will continue to have access to the tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Okay, I'm going to start with the last one first. So for the homestead exemption, this session, we passed a bill that said homestead exemptions, if your valuation goes up, you can't be kicked off because of valuation increases. During our special session, which was entirely about property taxes, I introduced a portion of the bill that, had we been able to get it passed, I've run into several people in my district as I'm door knocking who have been kicked off homestead exemption because their valuations went up. So in the last 3 or 4 years, so I had a part of the bill that said, going back 3 years, kind of when the things started shooting up really high, anyone who had been kicked off because of the valuations would be reinstated. Now, if they won the lottery, that's a totally different story. But again, talking to people at the door who say, I just got kicked off homestead exemption. Where am I going to find $5,000? I'm on Social Security. That is heartbreaking, and it shouldn't be happening. So I will continue to support that, trying to get that in place. But right now, valuations won't kick people off homestead exemption. The property tax, what we were trying to do, and the fact that the majority of people in the state, we are an aging state. And as at the doors yesterday, I was talking to someone who said, well, why don't we just make it after 65, you don't pay property tax anymore. The problem with that is then the entire burden of all taxes is on the younger cohort who are in the midst of raising families and doing things. We won't get people to move here if that burden shifts. Right now, we're kind of off balance as far as how many people are still living in their homes, but it would freeze things up tremendously, which would cause everything to suffer. So our property tax system is set up pretty convoluted. We have to broaden our tax base or have extreme spending cuts, because right now property owners pay $5.3 billion in tax. Income tax brought in $3.6 billion last year. Income tax is scheduled to go down, and we have to do that to be able to keep up with our neighboring states. We're at 6.84 now. By 2027, we'll get down to 3.99 as our highest. By that time, Iowa may well be at 0. And sales tax only brought in $2.3 billion. That means property owners were paying more than double what sales tax was bringing in. And that's because over the past several decades, lobbyists have come before the different legislators and said, hey, don't tax this. It's only a couple million. Well, those couple millions have added up to $6.9 billion a year that is not being taxed. That's why we were trying to do the special session. Those special interest exemptions have shoved all of those costs onto property owners. That is a shift that we need to undo and shift back. Now, not everything should be taxed. Some of those special interest exemptions were for business inputs. Those shouldn't be taxed because they'll be taxed on the outside. Some were for necessities. We don't want to tax necessities, but wants, things that you can have a choice to do. My part of it was, I want to tax candy and pop. And I say that as someone who loves chocolate and loves Diet Coke. Like, I was only going to tax the things that I wanted, but they are clearly a choice. The pushback from the grocers, the special interest went on heavy attack with all of these. We had senators who were being pulled off. The grocers put out ads saying they want to tax food. Candy is a food. Candy is not all foods. But I can't tell you the number of emails I got, and from a lot of seniors saying, please don't tax food. I can barely eat as it is. Like, how much candy and how much pop do you buy? And they're like, well, none, I'm diabetic. like the responses I got, like, listen, here's what we're trying to do. And they were all, well, that makes sense. Like, that's not a big deal. Go ahead and do that. I don't they don't use it, so they were fine with it. But again, the thought is, if we can broaden our tax base, we need to shift those property taxes back over. The resistance we met was just incredible. incredible. But some of the things that we did get do in the special session will help property owners long term. In 2019, the legislature then passed a bill that said, it was LB 103. If the valuation goes up, the tax levy has to go down by the same amount so that taxing entity can't take any more money unless they override it by a vote. They always override it by a vote, which is why you'll hear politicians saying, well, we're lowering your levy 3 points. Well, if it's gone up by 20 points, they're taking 17% more. That is gaslighting and deceptive, and especially for seniors, that kind of gaslighting is really confusing, because what they hear on TV is, well, they must be telling me the truth. That means I'm paying less, but they're not. They're paying more. The hard caps that we put on in this special session, and I have a lot of texts from a lot of mayors and county commissioners who are not happy with us about it, but it says they cannot raise taxes any more than the inflation or 0%, whichever is higher. Anything more, they have to go to the people to ask for in a vote, and that vote, and this is part that they were really upset about, has to happen at a general or primary election. Because we had someone come into the education committee last year, and I'm not on there, they were talking about it. And the guy said, well, listen, we really don't like that, having it at the general or primary, because if people see all of the things that they're being asked to increase or to pay, they'll add it up and they might decide not to. And we're like, yeah, that's our goal. And for them, that was the flaw. So we want to make sure that when people are being asked to pay more in taxes, they can look at it all and say, okay, gosh, it's not just $1 per 100. And, because those things don't make sense when you're in the voting booth. It's, I'm going to be paying like $40 more per $100. And oh my gosh, that's going to add up to a whole lot more. It gives more power to the voters. So, and AARP is really good about helping get out the vote. Those are the kinds of things, keeping seniors involved with what are those ballot initiatives? What are they going to be on your each ballot, and how much is it going to cost? That kind of information provided to your members will be absolutely critical, and say, okay, you live in this section of the city. This is what's being asked of you. If you said yes for all of these things, it would be this much more a month. That's the kind of information we need them to have. And the other thing is, the state cut $185 million from just inefficiencies in the government, and they're putting that in the property tax credit fund. We also put it in the bill, and we did not talk about this a lot during debate because we didn't want people to say, well, no, it needs to go to the different fund. Any revenue over 103% is directed to the property tax credit fund. So 100% pays for our bills, 3% goes in the rainy day fund, and anything extra goes to property tax credit. So we will be adding to it. It will be slower than what we had wanted to do with the expanded tax base, but we'll keep trying. But that's a really long-winded explanation.
No, I appreciate that, Senator. And again, I appreciate all your work with the special session and that sort of thing. And I know this issue will come back. And I really appreciate, yes, getting out and voting. Voter education is one of our top priorities also. And so certainly the transparency piece is so critically important for our members to understand. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. We are coming close to the end of our time. And so I would like to offer you back just a few more minutes, Senator Kauth, to talk about what your priorities are for serving in the legislature, and if there's any, specific issues that you plan to work on and address during your time as a state senator, or maybe ways that we can be helpful for you moving forward. So I will pass it back to you.
Absolutely. So I will be reintroducing the Sports and Spaces bill and adding to it the Women's Bill of Rights. So Sports and Spaces was my priority bill this year. We failed by 2 conservative senators who decided to do present not voting. And that basically says that boys don't play on girls' teams, and boys and girls will stay out of each other's locker rooms and bathrooms. We're going to expand it to include domestic violence shelters, anything that the state is involved with, state prisons, all of those, because I don't believe in backing down. I believe in doubling down. So since we didn't get what I consider to be reasonable done, we're going to expand it. It is really important to me that we preserve those things that have been fought for. I mean, the last 50 years of women's rights is being thrown away right now. And I've had the chance to talk with some incredible female athletes. Carol Frost has testified for my committee, and again, people who 50 years ago were working on this issue should be shocked at where we're at right now. So that I have a biometric data security bill that basically says you own your biometrics, because if you have any sort of tech, it's measuring your eye movement, it's measuring your hands, it's measuring your face, it's collecting biometric data from you that you may not even be aware of. And we need to put some guardrails around it, basically saying that you can give approval for it to be used, for it to be sold, or for it to be collected without actually impacting the use of the product. Business community does not like this. Mostly one of them kind of slipped up and said, you know, we might need that at some point, or we might decide we want to use that information at some point. We just haven't figured out how. I'm like, it's not their information. And that is something, especially with seniors, we need to make sure, I mean, because their biometric data is something they may not understand as it's being collected, how critical that is to the safety of their devices, to the safety of their bank accounts. I mean, if the wrong person gets their hands on that, it can be used for a whole lot of different things. So I have a biometric data security bill. We're looking at a mental health bill. So I was contacted by a woman who worked for Regional 6. She's a mental health care worker, and they don't have the same protections that nurses and doctors have in hospitals that say if you attack a healthcare provider, you have additional penalties, mostly because the people who they are caring for are mentally ill and not responsible for their actions. So we can't really target more, but she was assaulted and had a traumatic brain injury. Her recovery is going to be years. So we're meeting together to figure out exactly what it is we can do, how to put more guardrails in, or just if it happens, how do we support them more? So, and one of the things I want to mention is last year we passed a rule saying that starting this session, each senator only gets 20 bills. So all of us are kind of, you know, we have senators who would introduce 70 bills, and you know, that's crazy. But as I'm looking at all the ones, I keep walking to my office and like, okay, we're doing this. And they're like, okay, you're getting really close to the top. So there's going to have to be some, you know, deciding which bills are more important, which bills do we need to combine. But just for you guys to understand that the sooner you get to a senator about what bills you need introduced, the better, because people will run out of room. So let's see, I have a public health bill, a medical freedom bill. I'm going to do something with the immigration issue. I'm very concerned by the fact that we have approximately 60,000 illegal immigrants in the state. And that is absorbing our Medicaid funds. That is absorbing our housing stock. That is, you know, that's taking things away from people who are citizens here. I'm all for compassion, but you need to be here in this state legally to actually enjoy the tax benefits that we provide. So I'm looking at different ways to deal with that. Let's see, what else do I have? Those are really some of my biggest ones. I have a few other small ones, dealing with health and wellness, dealing with security. I'll have a public safety bill that I bring back that deals with the increase. We've had so much speeding crime, and you know, rates in 100 miles per hour or more on Dodge Street. People have been getting hit by cars, it seemed, and killed through distracted driving more and more and more. So I have a bill that will increase the penalties for distracted driving and increase the penalties for speeding. Haven't increased in like 30 or 40 years. It is cheaper to get a ticket than buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks in some cases. That's not okay. Again, back to my swift and severe. We need to have things that actually matter, or else people will continue doing it. So until they feel that pinch, they're going to continue speeding. And we've just had a lot of those types of issues here. And then I'm working with our county attorney here in Douglas County and the Sheriff's Department to talk about our rash of child-oriented crime. We had, I think it's up to 6 juveniles, 17 to age 11, involved with the theft of guns in a different location, and then coming up to Omaha and killing a 64-year-old man who was an Uber driver. They don't know which one pulled the trigger. They think it was a 13-year-old, but an 11-year-old has no penalties that can be attached. They can't hold him. They don't know if they can charge him. So there's a lot going on. Back again to my swift and severe, and back to the part about when kids are young, that's when they're learning what consequences really mean. If we say to kids, oh, don't worry about it, you're just a kid, they learn, I can get away with doing bad things. And then they, as an adult, they will continue to do bad things. If we say you're responsible because you took action and your consequences are going to be harsh, they learn, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So there's going to be some discussion, and quite a few of my fellow senators are very much opposed to anything that has to deal with imposing penalties on kids. But that's when their brains are developing. That's when their brains are learning that you actually have to, you have consequences when you take actions. So we'll be working on that for the rest of the fall.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Kauth, again, for taking the time to visit with us, spending the time today and answering our questions. Again, thank you for your leadership and your work in the legislature. We wish you the best with your campaign. And as I close out, thank you again for meeting with us today. And we look forward to future conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you
a great
all.
day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.